Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be with you this evening. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Yougov Poll, a poll that I have not seen covered by any other news media, possibly because of the fact that it indicates 92% of Americans are saying that they want to see President Trump found not guilty on the charges of insurrection and impeachment that are currently ongoing in the state Senate. And we're going to go over that poll and what some of that information means for the American public. But first, we want to mention, if this is your first time coming to our channel, we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook with you, taking your comments, your texts, your chats, your calls, and listening to what you have to say about the issues affecting us all from everywhere in the world. And we look forward to that expression of free speech every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You are invited to that. So let's address what's going on with this poll. A poll by YouGov, a poll of Americans looking at the current impeachment case going on in the Senate. How did we get here? What does that mean? How is this going to impact everyone? Well, let's first understand, how did we get here? Because it was on January 6th, as we all are very familiar with at this point, where there was a protest in Washington, D.C. Trump supporters were listening to the president speak about the election irregularities of the 2020 election. At the same time that that speech was ongoing, another group of individuals, a small group of a couple hundred individuals, decided to try and riot, to break into the D.C. Capitol, much in the same way that we had seen attempts of actual riots in Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, Rochester, New York City, and many other places across the entire United States throughout the entire summer and second half of 2020. Obviously, this disturbed a lot of people. And on January 7th, we spoke with everyone about the reaction to that riot in D.C. In the status that had now taken over the nation, the calls for insurrection that came from Democrats that had never been said before, no matter how many people had died or the amount of damage that had occurred in riots throughout 2020, were suddenly being labeled against Republicans and President Trump, and a call for an impeachment was made. Now, since that time, on January 25th, we had a conversation with you talking about what is actually insurrection, what is actually treason, what is it in the Constitution, how that defines it, and who, if any, elected officials actually qualify for the terms of treason, what qualifies for insurrection, and if there were any other political groups or individuals who had incited violence in America that we could apply these labels to, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. That brings us essentially to where we are today. We know that President Trump is undergoing a trial in the Senate at this time, the second time this has happened, with charges being brought against him based on the feelings of individuals like the chief associate or the chief member of the Democrats, a representative, Senator Raskin, Representative Raskin, who is handling the case against President Trump, trying to see that he is going to be impeached. And his current claims, including his personal feelings, as we're quoting from Yahoo News today, February 11th, that the third day of this process, not a trial, this is not a courtroom, but the case against President Trump, that the impeachment managers have made a compelling case this week that Trump has shown little remorse for his role in the January 6th riot at the Capitol. which essentially sums up the case from the Democrats that President Trump is guilty because of feelings, because of their impression, because of the lack of civility of some of his words, and that some Democrats have taken that to equal a call for violence and incitement of violence without any actual factual data. And again, this is why the Senate trial, the Senate case, is not a courtroom nor a trial, as there is no actual evidence, no statement by President Trump that directly calls for violence or to take over the government. That doesn't exist. There is conjecture, there are feelings and impressions, but no proof. That may or may not be enough to get President Trump impeached. But we do know that on January 6th, there was a Yougov poll, the America Speaks poll. And on January 6th, just prior to the riot in D.C., we know that they were asking a very simple question of the public. How do you feel about your family's future in the upcoming year, 2021? And the community respondents said 34% felt pessimistic, fully a third of America, with another roughly third, 38%, having an optimistic outlook. Now, this is very interesting because that falls mostly along the lines of the party memberships. Democrats are roughly about 30% of America. Republicans are roughly about 30% of America, with 40% of America falling into a independent or libertarians or other third-party organizations. So this is very much along party lines, but it is also a very big departure from the results we saw in the 2020 election, where Joe Biden got 80 million votes, the largest number of votes ever for anyone running for president, and in second place with the second most number of votes ever recorded for someone running for president, 74 million for President Trump, showing a deep division in America in a relatively close race. Also in the Yougov polling, we saw that there were another question that was asked that was very relevant, which we didn't know at the time, is what poses the greatest threat to the United States at this time? And the choices that were made by individuals taking the poll included that the biased media coverage overall, and that's biased left and right, 27% of respondents came with that answer. Another 27% felt that the political division that had occurred in the United States, essentially since 2016, but most especially in the 2020 election, were a massive concern, with 27% saying that that was something that they believed was going to affect America in 2021. Only a few hours after this poll, we found how true that was. So that brings us to essentially where we are today, dealing with the repercussions that we see from that poll. And what is the status now? Again, as we had shown you before, we want to go over exactly what the poll is telling America. This is the February 11th, This is the February 11th Yougov poll, the America Speaks poll. And this poll was exclusively for Republicans. No Democrats were asked this question. And in that poll, the Republicans were asked, do they have a positive or negative opinion of the Republican Party at this moment? 58% felt they were unfavorable, that they were not pleased with the Republican Party at this moment, based a lot, we would imagine, on the reaction to the D.C. riots, as well as other factors. Now, speaking about the Republican candidates, and this is very interesting. While 58% of respondents of Republicans said that they do not favor the party at this time, the top three choices are staunch Republican candidates and staunch members of the Republican Party. Donald Trump held 31% of all respondents, about almost double any other choice that was made. Coming up in second place was Ted Cruz, a senator who has been attacked by Democrats for also promoting insurrection, for merely putting up a challenge to the 2020 election results based on the election irregularities that we now see have been seconded and made true, or also claimed by former Democratic Congressman Anthony Brindisi. Prior to finally losing his election bid after 97 days, Anthony Brindisi, in his last-ditch effort, had made the claim that the Dominion voting systems were faulty, and taking a claim that many Republicans had said throughout the 2020 election, especially for president, that the Dominion system improperly accounted votes. But in this case, not from a Republican to a Democrat, but in the only case that we are aware of in the nation, that somehow the Dominion system took votes from a Republican and gave it to from a Democrat and gave it to a Republican. But again, election irregularities, very similar to what was claimed by Democrats in 2001, 2005, and 2017. And this is the reason why we saw both Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz attacked. And yet 18% of Republicans are looking forward to Ted Cruz running for president in 2024. In addition, Nikki Haley is also a very strong contender at this moment, looking forward to that election. But we're getting to the big numbers here. Now, it also goes to show the division in America at this moment when the poll asked if Donald Trump could start his own political party, would Republicans be willing to join it? Now, this is a very important statement, as even the largest of third parties options in elections right now, whether that would be considered the Libertarian Party or the Conservative Party, none of them have been able to pose a serious threat to the stronghold, the duopoly of Democrats and Republicans in elections. But yet we see 52% of those respondents from the Republican Party have said that they would be willing to join a third party. Amount of strength being indicated here, not seen even when we saw in the 1980s that a third party candidate had a true shot at winning the presidency. So we have to ask the question, as did the poll, what do people think about Donald Trump being impeached for inciting violence? Is this a constitutional event? And it's a very interesting question. And they asked the question, do you think it's unconstitutional to impeach a president who is no longer in office? A question that is addressed by Article 2 of the Constitution. The majority of Republicans that responded, 85%, stated that it is unconstitutional, that a former president cannot be impeached, which is supported by Article 2. This is opposed, of course, by Democrats, saying that anyone can be impeached at any time. Only 11% of Democrats that responded actually agree with the Democrats on their point of view. Now, even further, in looking at the trial, how should the Senate vote? What should be the outcome of this vote. Now, not surprisingly, with 85% saying that the election is unconstitutional, in fact, 92% of the Republicans responding to the Yougov poll, the America Speaks poll, 92% said that President Trump should be found not guilty. He should not be convicted of insurrection, of treason, of the charges and claims being made by the Democratic Party. Only 8% agree. Now, this is very important because at this moment, the Senate is divided 50-50, with Vice President Kamala Harris being the 51st vote, a tiebreaker. Although we've seen 6 Republicans vote for the impeachment trial, that is a far cry from the 2/3 required, or 67 members of the Senate that are required to actually get a conviction of treason against President Trump. And based on this, if senators are voting by the will of their constituents, this trial is not going forward. This will never be confirmed, which is the general consensus since day one that this impeachment has been called for, that the majority of Americans, Republican and otherwise, do not believe that there will be a conviction, and many believe that this is an unconstitutional event. And then we have the question that is equally as important. For those Republicans that are voting in favor of impeaching President Trump, of charging him with treason, what should be done? 87% found that those who are voting against President Trump, who are voting in favor of the charges being alleged by Democrats based on their feelings of his words, 87% felt that these individuals were being disloyal. And 13 said that their vote was principled. Now, I find this question in particular poor. It's a horrible poll question because the difference between disloyal and principled are two different things. You can be very principled and you can be loyal, or you can be very principled and disloyal to a faction, a group, or an organization. If you are a champion of the Constitution, voting for the Constitutional standing on something doesn't necessarily mean that you're following party line politics. That's something that Democrats often misunderstand. And they believe that party loyalty is the same thing as being principled and constitutional. They're not. And so this is a horrible question, asking an entirely different question, because some members of Congress, Republicans, that are voting against President Trump, voting against the will of their constituents, against the will of 92% of Republicans, whether they like or dislike the Republican Party at this moment, it's not saying they're not being principled. They can be principled and not loyal to the party. It doesn't make them disloyal to the party. Not necessarily. But the real focus here is the 92%. 92%. Now, we repeat that and say that again because we feel it's very important. 58% of Republicans are unhappy, displeased with their representatives in elected office right now, politicians at every level of government. And yet, 92% believe that President Trump should not be convicted. That's a very powerful statement. A very powerful statement about the division in America that has been fomented, as we know, by some Democrats. As we know that there was a secret cabal, as reported by the New York Times, that worked since 2019 against even Democratic candidates like Senator Bernie Sanders to push the election into the results that we see. Now, some would call that rigging an election. Some would call it fortifying an election. But one thing we can all say is it divided the nation about this election, because America is very divided at this time. And perhaps that's the reason why this poll hasn't been mentioned anywhere, and it should. Because while it may show that Americans aren't satisfied with the Republican Party right now, many Americans, a majority in this poll, are satisfied with President Trump. That tells us something about this trial, this impeachment, the second attempt by Democrats. Many have called this purely political. And considering the outcome of this, which would only result in preventing President Trump from running again, something that 31% of those taking this poll would vote for in 2024, it seems only more political that this entire process is merely to take away a political opponent from Democrats who they're not sure they can beat. There are many things that can be taken from this poll, and many viewpoints that some may have about it. We want to hear what you think. This is the results of the poll. How do you feel about it? Do you agree with this Yougov poll? Do you believe that President Trump should not be convicted? Do you believe that this is an unconstitutional impeachment? Do you believe that because you're a Democrat or a Republican? And how much does politics play into what you feel about this poll and this process right now? We're looking to hear what you have to say. What do you think? We thank you for your comment. We hope that you liked this and enjoyed it. Please do like and share. And most of all, please let others know about this by subscribing so that it can reach more people and they can respond and share in this expression of free speech. We thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.